From a young age, we're told to grow. Relatives comment on it, doctors track it, and parents encourage it. But once we're older, we begin to obsess over it. Somewhere along the way, growth becomes our ultimate goal, our only goal, something to be achieved at any cost. So we compromise our values, we mislead, we put our customers at risk. We trade trust for a payout and choose what's easy instead of what's right. The world says you must be cold, cruel, and cutthroat to succeed. We disagree. Here at HubSpot, we believe it's not enough for businesses to grow. They need to grow better. But what exactly does that mean? Growing better is remembering you're helping people with unique needs and dreams. It's letting them interact with you on their terms, not yours. Growing better is adding value before seeking a reward. It's more than what you sell, it's whether those you sell to succeed. Growing better is placing long-term relationships ahead of short-term gains. It's staying true to your values and making the right decisions, even when they're not the easy ones. Growing better is succeeding with a soul. At HubSpot, we've made it our mission to create a platform and community that help you do just that. Because when our customers succeed, we do too. Grow better with HubSpot.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming today. I'm really excited. This is the first event we've done like this in Singapore, and we've actually had people fly in from Taiwan, Malaysia, India, and I think it's the start of something really special. So if anything, I should be the one clapping you. Thank you very much for coming. You make my life a lot easier. This event was a bit interesting because we wanted to make it something really special. And part of doing that was, we wanted to have a great venue, great food, and we wanted to assemble something. All of that was complicated, and as we started getting into it, it was like, oh, well, you need to charge for tickets because it's quite expensive, and that's the way events ran. But we've never done that before. And David Falami, who's the mastermind behind today, that you should all worship, I do. He's done a great job. He was researching it and he came back to me, he's like, ticket sales is interesting. Everyone I chat to says you won't know how many people are going to buy a ticket until the last 3 weeks. I was like, that's slightly unnerving, Dave. It's risky to put on this big event and then not know how many people are going to rock up. He was like, yeah, I know, it's tricky, isn't it? And we're like, should we do this? Like, it's a really big risk. And we ultimately decided that we thought it's a risk worth taking. We thought there was a bit of a void for an event that would produce a lot of great content that would really help businesses grow better. And we decided to roll the dice. And thank you all so much for coming. We actually had over 1,200 people buy tickets for today. And I think it's something we should be really proud of. So let's give a warm round of applause for Dave Falami. So I'll jump into the agenda. I think the slide I'm most proud of is this one. We have speakers from all these companies that are managing director for APAC, and he's going to be talking about business growth in APAC. And then we're going to have a closing keynote where Shahid is going to be having a chat with JD Sherman, HubSpot's COO, who flew in all the way from Boston to be here today, which I think will be really interesting, talking about lessons learned from HubSpot's journey from a startup to now a listed public unicorn. And in the middle of the day, we're breaking it into 2 tracks. So we have a company track and then we have a revenue track. And the company track is looking at growth from a real company perspective, and the revenue track has more topics that dive into specific areas of a company and how they grew. The best place to find out more about these is on the agenda that you all have, and you can choose between tracks. So you can go to one in revenue and then later go to one in company. You're not wedded to one in particular. And at the same time, we're going to be running a lot of workshops. So at HubSpot, a lot of people come to events and they want to learn more about HubSpot. So we have demo sessions running throughout the whole day where you can learn more about the product. If you're a marketing agency and you're interested about partnering with HubSpot, we have some sessions on how that works. And as well, we have a bunch of free software. And we actually have some workshops where you can get set up on that today, and our team is going to help you set it up in such a way that you can start to see some immediate quick wins, which I think will be really valuable. If you look at your agenda, on the back is a messenger scan code. Hands up who has Facebook Messenger on their phone. Okay. So I thought it would be higher. That's about 50% of the audience. Normally it's like 70%. But what we've built for today is a messenger bot with everything you need. So if you're needing some help, you can just go in there, ask a question. If you're wanting to look at the agenda, you can do that. If you want to chat to somebody from HubSpot, it actually enables you to book time on their calendar, and then you can have that conversation. It's really, really powerful. For anybody that does events, I think this is a great thing that most events should really do. It provides a lot of benefit to people. And we also have a lot of people tuning in on the live stream and on Facebook Live. And so if you hear some content today that you think is really valuable, please tweet it out using the hashtag #GrowWithHubSpot so that they can get some value from those sessions as well. All right, let's kick it off. Could everyone please give a warm round of applause for Shahid Nizami?
Hello, everyone. That's quite loud. Let's try it again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grow with HubSpot. That's exactly how James wanted me to say this, because this event is all about Grow and only a little bit about HubSpot. Now to my intro slide, and that's a very important intro slide because of a couple of reasons. I'm very sure that half of this room, and this is based on my lifetime experience, half of the room, when you read my name, you end up calling it Shahid. And Shahid means a dead man. Okay? So I'm pretty much alive and kicking, like you can see. So it's Shahid and not Shahid. And thank you, James, for finally getting it correct, because you've been actually getting it wrong all this while. He really practiced the hardest for this introduction session to get my name correct. So good job, James. The other bit which is important to note there is actually I have more clothes than that. I just realized I'm exactly wearing the same shirt and the same jacket today as in the picture, just for the record. And the last bit, like James said, I'm fairly new to HubSpot. In fact, today I complete 4 months at HubSpot, so today is my 4-month anniversary, if that's a word. Before this, I was working at a couple of companies. I was at a company back in India. Then I joined Oracle and stayed there for more than a decade. And for the last 5 years, I was running the APAC install-based business for Google Cloud. So really excited to be here at HubSpot, because HubSpot's mission is really to help millions of organizations to grow better. And I really like that phrase, grow better, because we don't really talk about growing faster, but growing bigger, but really it's about growing better. And in today's talk, I'll focus a lot on how you can grow better. In fact, we'll talk about the 4 F's of going better, and we'll come to the 4 F's a little later. The 2 of the F's are the good F's, and 2 are the bad F's, but we'll get to that. Don't let your imagination run wild there. But for a bit, I wanted to talk about why it's important to grow better. Now, I've been in the Southeast Asia market for more than 11 years now, and I really feel that we are entering a new era of doing business. And that's because of 2 key reasons. The first reason is that technology has changed. I was speaking with one of my friends last week, and I was telling him that I really wish I was born 100 years later. Because I really think if from 100 years from now, flying cars or taking a weekend trip to the moon would be an absolutely normal thing. But even now, in the last few years, technology has really, really changed how our customers interact with us. There are Facebook Messengers, WhatsApp, live streams, so on and so forth. So our customers have changed a lot in the last few years. So we did a bit of a survey to understand this pattern a little more. And the first finding from the survey was that customers expect an immediate response from businesses. And in fact, 90% of customers feel this to be important, if not very important. If you look back at about 3-4 years ago, most companies, the SLA was that we will get back to you, Mr. Customer, in the next 3 to 5 business days. And that's totally changed now. The second finding from this research was actually that the trustworthiness on businesses is at an all-time low. Now, it's not too surprising that people don't really trust salespeople a lot, but this slide is a bad one for most people in this room, because most of you here are marketers and salespeople, and the trust people have on us is at an all-time low, and especially marketers. So James, for a long time, you guys were actually trusted a lot, but now you and I are in the same bucket. The funny thing on the slide is the baristas. What wrong did they do to just get a 6% approval? I'm really not sure about that. But anyways, if our customers, our consumers, are not trusting sales and marketing people, who are they trusting today? And the research says that they are actually trusting other people, other customers and consumers of your business. And the top 2 things which really help customers make their final purchase decision is actually word of mouth and customer references. That's what is deciding that last mile in that purchase-making decision. Let me share a story with you. That's my son, Kian. Kian is 5.5 years old. He's very clear about saying 5.5. He takes an offense if I just say you are 5 years old. So he's 5.5 years old. And we were planning a vacation with Kian a couple of months ago. And we thought we'll go to a few towns in Switzerland, and we'll go to Paris, because he knows that there's Disneyland in Paris, and his favorite toy is the McQueen car, and he could actually pose in front of a big McQueen. I'm not sure why he's posing with a bike pose in front of a car, but that's for another day. But when we were planning this vacation, we actually started looking for the best hotels to stay in Paris. And just like most other people will do, went to Google and looked for best hotels to stay in Paris. And as you can expect, right after that, every website I went to, my Facebook feed, I only saw advertisements about best hotels in Paris. So the marketing engine did kick in there to help me get to these few hotels. And obviously then I went to their marketing websites and I shortlisted 2 hotels. But my final decision of which hotel to pick to stay was really based on not what the marketing and sales people told, but what the customer said. So I went to the online forums like Google Reviews or TripAdvisor and so on and so forth to look at what kind of feedback did the hotel get from their existing customers who had stayed there. And that's what made me to get to the final decision. And you might be thinking this is more of a B2C example, but in the B2B world, I think it's even more relevant because there's a lot more at stake than just planning a vacation. And there are other websites like G2Grow, for example, which actually helps you to find those. Now, what the story really tells us is that your customers today are your best marketing channel. And word of mouth is really how customers are deciding their decisions. But we believe businesses are falling behind on that trend. And it's no longer enough to grow, but it's very important that we need to grow better. Now, what does grow better mean? Grow better means that you're not growing at any cost. You're growing in a way in which you see everybody's success, and most importantly, your customer's success. So we'll spend the next few minutes talking about how do you grow better. And that's where we'll talk about the 4 Fs. But we at HubSpot believe you can grow better with inbound. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with inbound, inbound is a method, it's a methodology of attracting, engaging, and delighting people to grow a business that provides value and builds trust. Now, we believe that all businesses, end of the day, are actually interacting with people. You might be in B2B, B2C, but end of the day, you have to interact with people in a helpful, holistic, and human way, and that's what inbound helps us to do. You attract strangers or prospects to your businesses, to your websites. You engage with them in a meaningful way, and you really work hard to delight them as customers for life. Now, for a long time, businesses have been running by following the holy grail, which is the marketing and sales funnel. In fact, back in my B school days, this was one of the most important classes which talked about how you need to utilize the marketing and sales funnel to grow your business. There's one problem with this marketing and sales funnel. There's a crack there. So this first F, which is the funnel, we believe is not really able to serve us in the long run. And the crack there really is about the fact that here, customers are more of an end point. And we looked at the previous examples that customers are your biggest marketing channel. The other problem with the funnel is really customers are more of an afterthought. And it's a very linear way of running your business. You have to invest all your efforts and energy from the top of the funnel and then get more customers. And it's not reflective of an ongoing relationship with customers where customers are not the end point, but customers are actually at the heart of your business. So the funnel has served us really, really well for the last few decades, but we really feel that we need to give a farewell to the funnel. The funnel has decided to take its retirement in Phuket in Thailand. So can all of us give a big round of applause to the funnel for its retirement? Okay, you are a sporty audience, thank you. So if funnel, this linear way of running business, is not ideal, what is a better way of running your business? How do you really grow better in a non-linear way and in a way which reflects the continuous nature of engaging with your customers and getting them at the heart of your business? We believe that better way is the second F of the day, the good F, the flywheel. Now, for those of you who are more interested in science, flywheel is a machine, is a concept which was developed 200 years ago by a physicist called James Watt. And this was really the thinking behind the steam engine which led to the Industrial Revolution. And we think today, again, the flywheel will help us to get into the next era of doing business. So flywheel is really a machine which captures, stores, and releases rotational energy. And it's very much of an ongoing process than a linear process. Now, I'll talk about a few examples to get this very clear. But we believe that if you are looking at inbound as a way of growing better, you need to look at the inbound flywheel, which has those 3 elements of the flywheel, which is attract, engage, and delight. And the more you work on the flywheel, the faster it spins. And that takes us to the third F of the day, force. If you apply the right force to the flywheel, it will just spin faster and faster. Now, back in the 90s, I actually used to work at Xerox as a sales intern. And all the time, the focus was for us salespeople to become really good at understanding our products. And at that time, the maximum investment you got was by putting maximum forces on the engage portion of the flywheel. Now, engage is all about sales. How do you get your salespeople to engage with your customers in a better way? And at that time in the 90s, if you were more knowledgeable than your customers, which was really the case because of the lack of internet, you actually came as somebody who had a lot of value to add to the customers. So in the 90s, in the early 2000s, in fact, when I was at Oracle, we spent so much time on just making cold calls because we wanted our customers to know what can Oracle do for them. And that was really the element which was the maximum ROI on the flywheel. Around a 2005 timeframe, you got the maximum return on investment by applying your forces on the attract portion of the flywheel. And that was really the internet boom time where you could reach out to maximum number of customers through internet and attract them to your business. So this is how the HubSpot's flywheel looked for a very long time, till 2015 for sure. And all our forces were really around attract and engage portion of the flywheel. But we believe now the times are changing again, and our forces should be actually focused on the delight portion of the flywheel. That's where you will get the maximum return on investment. So let me give you an example of that. For a long time, we had a very simple commission structure. If you closed a deal as a sales rep, you got paid for that deal. We made a change to that whole concept where now at HubSpot, if a sales rep closes a deal and the customer churns in the first 8 months, we actually claw back that commission. Not very popular with our sales folks, but very effective to delight our customers. That was the first tweak we made to our commission plan. The other tweak we made to the commission plan was that if you sold to a customer, you set the right expectations, they were actually a happy customer in the long run, they had a good NPS score, then we actually gave you an accelerator on your commission plan. What happened with this was, one, your entire sales team actually was not focused on closing the customer, but they were focused on delighting your customers. And with this flywheel, we actually moved from having only our customer success team on delighting the customers, but our entire org was just focused on one simple thing: we wanted to delight our customers, be it our sales teams, our marketing teams, and obviously the customer service and support teams. So if you're thinking about how do you apply that back to your business, I would say when you go back to work tomorrow, look at all the elements of your business and start looking at where are they sitting today and where can you really apply these forces to get the maximum return on investment. Let me give you an example. That's me and my wife, Roshni, and we were on a holiday a few years ago. Now you might be thinking, why are you only talking about holidays? Well, I have this philosophy in life. I believe that your biggest savings are not in your bank account. Your biggest savings are actually on your Google Photos account. So even, like, Roshni and I have been together for about 15 years now, and even in our early days when we had very less money, we actually used to just go on vacations every time we had some money saved. And that's really what we've done. But this is not a philosophy class. So let me get back to how did we get delighted in this instance. So we went to this property called Taj Vivanta in south of India, a place called Coorg. And before we went there, we had to fill up like a customer registration form with a lot of details. But when we reached that hotel, that resort, we were actually greeted by our first names by the folks at the valet, the front office staff, as well as the housekeeping staff. When we went to our room, it had the right aroma, which we said is a preferred aroma. When we went to the restaurant, the restaurant staff actually knew my allergies. The guy's like, "Sir, we know you're allergic to cucumbers." Yes, I am allergic to cucumbers. As per a random, unreliable survey, 1 in a million people are allergic to cucumbers. So that's my fame to glory, that I'm 1 in a million. I'm sure my mother is very proud today that I'm 1 in a million. But again, coming back to this, so everything we did at the resort, we actually had a very delightful experience. And more so than me, Roshni was really, really impressed. So when we got back home after the vacation, she convinced 5 of her other friends that they should plan their next holiday to stay at Taj Vivanta at Coorg. So what happened here? When the staff at that property actually forgot about just closing us, but focused more on delighting us, Roshni actually became a walking, talking, breathing flywheel for that customer. And that's how the businesses are growing today. So we feel that if you have that right forces applied, and more so in this age on the delight portion, you'd be able to really, really be successful and grow better. So we've talked a lot about the physics of growing better. What I want to do the next section was really about the philosophy of growing better. And that's important because we are, again, in a changing scenario in the business age, where for a long time, if your product was 10 times better than that of the competitors, in most cases, you were successful. We believe times are changing, where now, if your customer experience is 10 times lighter, you will be more successful. And that brings us to that fourth F of the day, which is the bad F, friction. If you have more friction in your business, actually, your customer experience will not be lighter. And if you have less friction, then your flywheel will actually spin faster and faster. And that takes us to a very interesting trendy versus truthy story. A lot of businesses today, they say that they are customer obsessed. That's a trendy thing to say. But really speaking, the truth is, a lot of customers or a lot of businesses today are actually self-obsessed. If you pick up a case study for businesses, you will find more about them and less about their customers. A lot of businesses today say that they are customer first. That's a trendy thing to say. But the truth is, most businesses today are customer eventually. Just like how you saw that at the linear marketing and sales funnel. The customer is more of an afterthought. And when I'm saying most businesses, that includes HubSpot as well to some extent. And so, what we did was, we decided to take a hard look at ourselves. And we asked some really tough questions. And we talked to people who really mattered the most to us, our customers. So we talked to thousands of our customers, and we captured all that we learned in a document called the Customer Code. Now, some of you might be familiar with HubSpot's Culture Code. That's a document we released a few years ago, and it got more than 4 million views. And one of the tenets of the Culture Code was that we want to be a business which solves for the customer, SFTC, as we call it. And really, the Customer Code is an extension of that. And that's going to tell us, how do you solve for the customer in a holistic way, and that will help you to reduce the friction on your flywheel. So these are the 10 tenets of the Customer Code. And actually, you can go to customercode.com and take a look at it in more detail. But in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you some of my favorites from these 10 tenets of the Customer Code. The first one, which I love, is own your screw-ups. Now, I've been teaching this to Kian in the last few weeks, that, hey, Kian, everyone makes mistakes. That's a part of life. Even I make mistakes. Actually, I don't, but I say that to him. But it's how you deal with these mistakes is what sets you apart. And there's a very simple 3-step formula to deal with your mistakes. The first is to say you're sorry. Second, actually be sorry. And more importantly, you make that better. So great example of that is KFC. Now, you might be looking at me and thinking that I might be a great fan of KFC. I'm actually not a lot into fast foods, but this example really made me a huge fan of KFC. So the situation here is that KFC in UK, they changed their supplier. And because of that, there was a breakdown in their supply chain, and some of the KFC restaurants in UK ran out of chicken. So a KFC restaurant without chicken doesn't make any sense. So what KFC did was, they actually came out with a full-page ad apologizing to their customers about that. Now just think about it. They make a mistake, they screw up, and they spend extra money to broadcast that mistake to the entire world. This is the ad which they put out. What I really like about this ad is that it's very playful, and then the headlines of this ad is the 3 golden words. Not "I love you," that's equally powerful, but they said, "We are sorry." And then they go on to say that a chicken restaurant without chicken is not ideal, and so on and so forth. But nowhere in that apology do they say, this happened because we changed our supply chain vendors, and that's because of that there was a breakdown. Because that's none of the customer's problem, right? When a customer shows up at KFC, all they want to get is chicken, and they don't care about your supply chain. So that's our first example about KFC. And when you do that, your customers will really, really appreciate it. They'll appreciate it so much that this problem actually is going to move from a mistake to getting to customer delight. Look at some of these examples here. Matt says, this KFC apology ad is so good, it's almost worth running out of chicken for. So really, this is a great example of how a brand owned up their mistake and moved that moment into a customer delight moment. And the data substantiates that as well, as per our research. The customers we interviewed said, if a company makes a mistake and then owns up and makes it right, 96% of the customers would continue to buy from that brand. The second tenet of the customer code, which I really love, is I don't mind paying, but I do mind being played. And this is all about your pricing. We feel that you need to keep your pricing and discounts open, clear, and fair. And that's what we heard from the feedback from customers about how they would want to engage with businesses. So the first point is about how do you keep your pricing and discounts open. Now, your pricing information should not be like a holy grail which needs to be protected. You should do your best to make your pricing as open as possible. In fact, the survey went on to say that if a company does not have pricing information on their website, 3/4 of the respondents will actually look for an alternative. Now, you might be thinking that we are a niche business or we are into B2B. If that's the business which you run, it's not really possible for us to have our pricing open on our websites. But how can you make this more transparent? You can make that by at least mentioning things like, we charge by the project, or we charge by the hour, and typically our pricing ranges $10,000 to $80,000. That's good enough, but at least try to make it as open as possible. The second focus is on how do you keep your pricing and discounts clear. We believe your customers should not need a math degree to figure out what are they going to pay for your products and services. Your price code should not look like this. And I'm sure 10% of the audience is like, that's such an easy equation to solve. Well, your pricing should be easy to understand for mere mortals like me. And again, the data substantiates that. The research says that if pricing is confusing, 69% of the customers would not buy. And the last bit on the pricing bit is how do you keep your pricing and discounts fair? So here's a small task for you to do when you get back to your offices tomorrow. Just look at the last 10 invoices which your company sent to your customers. And then wear your customers' glasses and read those line items. And if you see that some of these line items just don't make any sense, then you need to rethink that is your pricing fair. My next favorite tenet from the customer code is don't block the exit. Now this is a tough one. Because we made buying so easy, then why do we make leaving so hard? If you have been interacting with businesses, many a times when you want to cancel the service, this is what it looks like. Variations of that, but this is the essence. of the pain of canceling a service. Now, if a company makes it easy and simple to cancel, the survey says 89% of the customers would actually be more likely to buy. So that's a big revolution. And I'm sure you've seen this classic button which says buy now with one click. HubSpot's philosophy now is changing towards how about this kind of a button? How do we make the cancellation process as smooth as possible for customers? So really, if I have to summarize the customer code, that would be this slide. Do the right thing. Do the right thing even when it's hard. In fact, do the right thing especially when it's hard. Because when you do the right thing when it's hard, you actually differentiate yourself from the others. Because not everybody is doing the hard thing. That's why it's hard. And it's not easy for you as a business to look at the short-term success at the cost of your customers. It's not easy for you as businesses to let your customers go easily with an easy cancellation plan. It's not easy for us as businesses to own our screw-ups. But we believe doing the right thing, it's not just a nice thing to do, this will define your destiny as businesses. And if you ignore your customers, your businesses will suffer. So that's really the summary of the customer code. Now a bit of homework. You're like, we paid for this event and you're giving us homework? Well, just a bit of it so that you can go back and apply some of these concepts at workplace tomorrow. First, try to build your own flywheel. There's this link there by which you can learn how do you make your own flywheel. And like I shared that example, look at all elements of your business, all forces of your business, and apply them on the flywheel and see where do you get the maximum ROI. If you look for hashtag #RFlywheel, you'll find a lot of other examples as well about building your own flywheel. The second homework is for you to look at the customer code and build a report card for your company. Now, HubSpot did that last month. Our founder, Dharmesh Shah, actually looked at all the 10 tenets of the customer code and built a report card to say, where do we stand as a company? It's not an easy task. It's a very difficult task. But it'll really give you a good idea about where do you stand on your journey to delight your customers. So you can download the report card from customercode.com, but that might be a very engaging exercise for you as business owners. So our key takeaways for the day, the 4 Fs. The first F, the funnel, that's dead. The flywheel, we believe, is the new way to grow. You have to look at what forces you apply on the flywheel to make it spin faster. And last, you have to focus on reducing friction wherever possible to help your flywheel go faster. And you can reduce your friction by looking at some of the tenets of the customer code. So the next steps, stop thinking about your business as a linear funnel and start thinking about it as a flywheel where you'll make different decisions. And the second bit is really, if you look at the customer code and you really focus on your business, not only to close customers, but to delight them and earn your customers' love, you will definitely grow better. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Awesome work. Thank you, Shahid. That was fantastic. Now, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to go into the breakout sessions. So we've got the company growth track, the revenue growth track, and then the workshops. Again, the best place to see which ones you'd like to attend is by looking in your agenda, or we've even had some people asking on Facebook which they think would be the best, so feel free to delegate the decision to the Facebook Messenger bot if you like, and we're going to get started in 5 minutes. So thank you all very much. See you soon. Hi, everybody. If you could grab your seats, we're going to get started in a second. I'll just not spoil this selfie. So this is the company track, and again, this is where you're going to hear more at a high level how companies as an organization have grown. And our next speaker is Jitu Matani, who has done this for HubSpot in international. He's had one of the best careers I've heard of. He really started the international business. He came to HubSpot as a sales rep, saw the opportunity for international, moved to Dublin, set up operations there, did the same thing coming out here, and has grown a really, really substantial international business. And he's seen it all the way from the first international dollars to where we are now. So I think it's a really, really interesting journey he's been on, and he's got lots of great insight. So let's bring him up. G2.
Thanks, James. All right, good morning, everyone. Too loud or pretty okay? Cool. This is a breakout, so you're here to get a bunch of detail on how to grow an international business over 100 million. My name is Jitu Matani. I'm part of HubSpot, as you know, and I've been with HubSpot for almost 9 years now. Quick fun fact is I used to live in Singapore until about 6 weeks ago. And about a month and a half ago, took my family back to the Boston area, back to HubSpot's HQ. So we're here to grow. And growing to me is a lot about experiences. And I look back to the last 6 to 7 years when we started this journey on global expansion. Most of these experiences for me have been shaped through travel. The chance to travel globally and go to many, many countries. So we're going to kick things off with a quick real-time survey to find out who in this audience has traveled to the most number of countries. It could be a little messy, but we're going to give it a try. I'm going to give you 15 to 20 seconds to mentally process how many countries have you traveled to. And there is a prize at the end. There's some HubSpot swag, so do run this through your mind for about 10 more seconds on the most number of countries you've traveled to in your lifetime. All right, we'll have everyone stand up. All right, keep standing if you have traveled to at least 2 countries. This is off to a good start because it would be really scary if you haven't traveled outside Singapore. All right, keep standing if you have traveled to at least 10 countries. Wow, this is a tough crowd. Globetrotters in this room. Keep standing if you have traveled to 30 countries. All right, keep standing if you have traveled to 50 plus countries. All right, rather than make this too complicated, I think we have, I'm just going to make this a lucky draw. I think we have a winner. How many countries have you traveled to? 80, wow, okay. Which is your favorite country? All right, we got a winner over here. This is awesome. I'm going to have a bag of swag from one of the HubSpotters given to you in a moment. So we'll just give a round of applause for all her travels. So I've had a chance to travel too, and my journey started about 7 years ago back in Dublin, Ireland. It was January of 2013 when we opened HubSpot's HQ in Dublin. And this is my team back in early 2013, about 20, 25 HubSpotters. They grew pretty fast. This is their team last year, where it's pretty close to about 400 HubSpotters. We couldn't find a room, so we had to go to the terrace or to the rooftop in order to take this picture. We continued growing, and after Dublin, we opened Sydney. In those days, we were about 20 HubSpotters. We're a little over 70. Then we opened Singapore in 2016. Opened actually additional space a couple of weeks ago. The cool thing about this experience is that I had to go through 2 line dances. I think you guys have mostly seen a line dance. It was awesome. And if you're wondering if I caught some cabbage and oranges, I did catch some cabbage and oranges. I'm told it's lucky, so still have those cabbages and those oranges. Then we went to Tokyo. We opened our Tokyo office. Right after that opening, it was a cool experience where we had a chance to go to a shrine and get some blessings, which was nice because things are going well. I think those blessings actually paid off. And then we went to Berlin. And if you're wondering, what are those glasses? Yep, it's Berlin, it's Germany. They got some beer and wine, and that was also an experience when we opened that office. And last week, we opened our LATAM headquarters in Bogota, Colombia. So things have gone pretty well. We've seen a bunch of growth. I personally, with my team, have seen over 800 HubSpotters hired across 6 offices. Now, most of this growth has been great. A little sync issue over there. Most of this growth has been great, but along this journey, which started about 6.5 years ago, my wife and I also had our 2 kids in Dublin, Sachi and Dylan. They're sitting in Boston. That's actually an apple farm behind them. It was kind of odd for them to go from Singapore to an apple farm a couple of weeks ago. They actually were able to pick apples from trees. And in that journey, we also added a dog to our family. That's Rafi. He's got his happy birthday hat on him. The kids got a little package of bones to try and get him to enjoy his birthday. But all in all, this growth has been great. But some of it has not been great because over the last 6 years, I've probably put on maybe 15 pounds. Now, that's the unofficial number. We'll stay away from the official number. It could be 10, it could be 20, doesn't matter. But point being, lots of great personal and professional growth. Some growth hasn't been great on the weight front. But generally, jokes aside, why bother? Why bother growing an international business? Let's think about this. So when you look at the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the U.S. by market cap, these 500 largest U.S. companies get close to 50% of their revenue from outside the U.S. A bunch is coming from South America, Canada, Africa, Europe, and Asia. But you're wondering, what do you do? How do you get started with international growth? What are the steps you can take to grow a big business outside your local geography, which is essentially growth outside your local HQ? Now, you want to be careful because while the world is big, lots of countries, it's also kind of like a big bad world. Either you're going to fall into a pothole or you might get eaten by sharks. Now, no one wants to get eaten by sharks, but it's possible. And we saw this happen with Mattel in China. Everyone knows Barbie? Barbie the doll? Sachi, my daughter, has a Barbie. And Mattel entered China making a big assumption that they had a demand for Barbie and the way Barbie looked in the Western world. But that was a miscalculation because the children in China were expecting Barbie that looked different. Mattel did not adapt Barbie for China. They actually missed the boat. Now, I love Barbie. I also love Starbucks, and I love my coffee. Who loves coffee? I love coffee. I think Starbucks was hoping for a home run when they entered Australia. They ended up opening almost 100 stores, and they made an assumption that Aussies love the taste of Starbucks coffee. Bad calculation there because if you're Aussie and if you have a friend from Australia, man, you love your coffee. You know real coffee. I like Starbucks coffee. It's not fake coffee. It's just that Starbucks coffee, I think, is a little bit more sweeter when you compare it to coffee that you can get from Australia. So they opened close to 100 stores, and they had to shut almost 70 stores, and there's somewhere between 30 to 35 stores today. So how exactly do you grow a successful international business? How do you avoid the mistakes that Mattel and Barbie actually made in China and Starbucks made in Australia? So I'm going to give you guys 3 phases that HubSpot has gone through to grow an international business over $100 million. So the first phase is what I would call like markets pulling you in. Think about it, like before you enter a market, you don't want to land over there and hope that you've got demand. Buyers are lined up to buy your products or services. You're better off for markets to signal to you that it's time for you to enter. This is actually HubSpot's traffic in Asia. Visitors from Asia that come to the HubSpot domain. The little sprocket that you can see is when we opened our office over here in Singapore. What do you guys think is happening here? Our traffic is going up, but we didn't open an office when we were all the way to the extreme left when we had no traffic. We opened an office when the market was pulling us in. So when we landed in Singapore, we didn't have to try and figure out like where our buyers or where our prospects. The demand was already there. Traffic was pulling us in, and that's how we've been able to grow over the last 3 years rapidly from 0 to 100 plus HubSpotters and added a bunch of new office space. And as things kept going well, you can see traffic going to your right. We invested more in marketing, and things continue to crank. Now, we know traffic is hard. We've surveyed many of you in Southeast Asia, and you've told us one of your biggest challenges is how do you generate traffic and leads? We get it. That's the #1 marketing challenge that we see marketers have over here in Southeast Asia. Now, if you're telling me I'm going to go get a bunch of traffic through traditional marketing or outbound marketing, I'm sorry, guys, that playbook is broken. That ship has sailed long, long time ago. And that outbound playbook, when you look at a bunch of statistics like people skipping TV ads, 83% skip them. 97% do not open direct mail. 48% are on what we call do not call lists. So if you want to do an outbound playbook, unfortunately, that's not going to work. What you need to do is an inbound playbook or inbound marketing. Now, Shahid talked about this, which is the flywheel, which is about attract, engage, and delight. And when you implement an inbound playbook, you're going to attract traffic and customers using content. So at the heart of an inbound strategy is content. You need to create content that adds value before you extract value. Shahid gave you guys a couple of examples. And the idea around all those examples is before you do a traditional outbound playbook, if you think about it, you're essentially trying to extract value. And when you try to extract value first, it's not going to work. Those buyers are not going to engage with you. They're probably going to look somewhere else, and they're probably going to go online and look at content to help answer their pains and questions. So what you need to do is add value first. And when you add value through content, content can be many different types, but at the end of the day, what content needs to do is it needs to inspire, it needs to educate, or it needs to entertain. If you're able to do one or all three, you're building a relationship with your prospects and your customers, and those relationships eventually will give you a chance to extract value. But you got to add value first. It's what HubSpot did early on when we opened our office in Singapore, which is a lot of great content. We got a bunch of great demand, and that demand converted into customers for us. So you're thinking, well, what types of content? The different types of content. It could go from blog posts to infographics to videos to presentations. I personally like blog posts. The way I would think about it is if you have a sales rep and that sales rep is answering a prospect or a customer's question, most likely that same question is being asked by thousands or tens of thousands of other prospects out there. So let's look at an example. This is a blog post, guys, that we published back in October of 2013. This was before I put on my 15 pounds. Life was good. Life is so great, just different pant size. But point being, it was back in October of 2013 when we published the single blog post. And you guys can see that single blog post that probably took us 2 hours has continued to generate traffic over the next many, many years. So what is going on? We didn't promote this blog post. We didn't do traditional outbound to promote it. What's happening over here is that blog post was around a press release template. In those days, HubSpot internally was trying to figure out how to write a great press release. Instead of it sitting on a marketer's laptop, we converted that piece of content into a template and then into a blog post and published it online. But you know what? That blog post is optimized for press release template, and that key phrase is getting searched 12,000 times per month. Now, the good thing about this is if your effort is flat but consistent, if your effort is flat and consistent, that effort will result in a hockey stick effect when it comes to traffic and leads. So we've done this research. There is a tipping point. If you can keep your effort consistent, whether it is 2 hours a day or 2 hours a week, I don't think it matters. The point being, as long as it's consistent, you will see increasing amounts of traffic and increasing amount of leads. The other example is through tools. Now, HubSpot has a bunch of tools. I think everyone in this room probably has a mobile phone. Yep. All right, I'm going to have you guys take your phone out and open a browser and go to this domain, website.greater.com. And you're like, come on, like there's got to be a prize at the end of this too, right? Yep, absolutely. There is a prize at the end of this too. I'm not going to tell you how do you get it until you get your browser out and go to website.greater.com. See a lot of clicks over here. And enter your website and your email ID. What's going on over here is we're adding value. We're adding value, and it's giving you a score that you can now take back to your team, maybe share with your executive team on this is where we rank in terms of our website score, and we've got to do something about it. But point being, we're adding value back to prospects. So take a screenshot of your website, and the person with the best website will get picked out. Just make sure you hash code it with Growth HubSpot. I'll go back one here. Lots of syncs. Well, fidgety with this clicker over here. So you got website.greater.com. Enter your domain and tweet it with the hashtag #GrowthHubSpot. One of the HubSpotters will reach out to the person with the best website score, and we'll make sure we get you a package of some goodies or a piece of swag. All right, let's keep moving on. So that's how we added value through software and tools. So what you guys want to do is have markets pull you in. That's phase one. Have markets pull you in, because when markets are pulling you in, that's a chance for you to start exploring, should I do something with that market? Now keep in mind, every piece of content you create is a chance for you to get found. You can share it through all your social networks, and that will translate into more traffic and more leads for your business. So markets are pulling you in. Your team is sitting down and seeing traffic come from all these countries, and you're like, well, what do we do next? We go to phase 2, which is what we call like, how do you assess which markets are worth your time? You guys with me? You got traffic coming from a bunch of countries. Now you need to figure out like, well, I just can't go to every country. Which country or regions or markets make the most sense? So we got this framework that we use at HubSpot. I'm sure every company has its own framework, but we follow this 3-step framework called a market assessment framework. Your first step is to identify the raw potential of markets or countries you might be interested in. The next step is to adjust that raw potential to be reflective of something that is more pragmatic. And the third step is you to say, well, these markets are big, but am I going to succeed or not through what we call the operational complexity? So let's run through the framework. Now, before I dive into the framework, when you look at regions globally, at HubSpot, we group regions with common characteristics. So for example, you'll see the term DACH, which is essentially Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Or you might see ANZ, which is Australia and New Zealand. What you want to do is group regions with common characteristics first. So let's go through the framework. Let's go through some examples. We're going to give you guys access to the sources from where we get this data. We'll share the deck with you after the presentation. But essentially what we have done over here as HubSpot is we looked at a bunch of regions, and we're interested in professional services firms, technology firms, and marketing agencies. So what we're trying to do over here is look at the total number of companies in these industries. We take our deal size, we multiply them, and we end up with what we call the raw potential. Make sense? It's essentially giving us like the aggregate raw size of a country or a region across all these different markets. Now, some of these numbers, when you run the math, it's going to be pretty damn big, guys. Now, what you need to do is temper it. Just because a market is big, it doesn't mean it's attractive. So what we do, and I think you can do the same thing, is temper the size of the market based on digital sophistication and cultural distance from your local HQ. Now, when you plot it on this graph, which is culture versus digital sophistication, you're going to see some regions come close to each other. So you're going to see the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand be very close to each other because they're culturally very similar. Similarly, you will see Korea and Japan, for example, close to each other in that cluster. But what we're trying to do over here is come up with what we call a discount we can apply to that raw potential. Simple math, we're basically looking at cultural distance by digital sophistication. We take that percent, and we're coming up with a discount we can apply to that raw potential. Now, once you have that discount you can apply, you can go across your raw potential, and you get what we call an after discount market size. I think you guys see what we're trying to do over here is markets can be big, but you got to be thoughtful that are they culturally similar to who you are, and are they actually digitally sophisticated for you to explore them? Now, the next thing we do is what we call an operational complexity score. Guys, like, the world is big, right? Lots of countries, but every country has its own dynamics when it comes to like things like employment laws, contracts, paying taxes, the legal environment, the political risk. You don't want to show up in a region that has like high operational complexity, because most likely you're going to struggle to succeed in that country. So what we've done at HubSpot is we size the market, we tempered it, and then we're looking at operationally, is it easy or is it difficult to tackle that country? So we end up with an operational complexity score, and we pull it all together, whereby you can, like, again, these are example numbers, but you and your executive team can get a simple spreadsheet and say, okay, we're doing inbound, we're getting a bunch of traffic. Great, let's look at all the countries, the traffic we're getting by country. What is the size of each market after we temper it? And then is it operationally easy or difficult for us to go into that market? And I'll leave it with you guys. You kind of like need to fill out that last column and say, yep, let's explore it, or no, not a big enough market, maybe operationally too complex, let's ignore it for 2019 or 2020. You guys still with me? Cool. So you did inbound. You got a bunch of traffic from a bunch of countries. Not every country is going to be attractive from an investment standpoint. So you went through a process of sizing it, tempering the size, and then looking at the operational complexity. Is it easy or difficult for us to break into that country? The next step is, great, Mr. CEO, we got a list of countries that we should explore further. But how do you actually enter a country? Now, before I actually share how do you enter a country from a sales standpoint, I want to share a really important number with you that HubSpot obsesses about, and I think you need to give it some thought, that we call lifetime value to cost to acquire a customer. The simple way to think about it is when you go to your bank and you put in $1, what does the bank give you back 2, 3, 4 years from now? If you put in $1 into that bank and that bank gives you $3 back, say after 2 or 3 years, man, that's an awesome bank. If you guys know that bank name, please send it to me directly, but that's an awesome bank. But from your business standpoint, you need to think about, if you make an investment to acquire customers, how much will those customers give you back over the lifetime value? So that's a ratio that we call LTV to CAC. So let's talk about it. Lifetime value is essentially the revenue you get from all your customers minus the cost of delivering that service. So you would deduct things like delivery time, support, hosting costs, maybe manufacturing costs. But essentially the way you can calculate LTV is you take the average deal size you get from a customer in any given month, the number of months on average a customer sticks around with you, times your gross profit. That results in what we call LTV. And I'm sure there's someone smarter than me out there that's going to say, well, there's a different way to calculate LTV. I'm sure there is a different way to calculate LTV, but what I want to do is give you a simplistic way you can get started with to calculate LTV with your team. The next thing is cost to acquire customers, CAC. Think about like the cost to acquire customers as the total cost that you would incur when adding customers. It could include your sales team's time, their commission, the marketing team's time, and maybe paid campaigns. So all those costs come together to acquire customers. The simple math to calculate CAC is go back with your team and look at your sales and marketing expense divided by the number of customers you get on average per month, and that's what we call CAC. So let's run this through a simple example. Let's say one of your customers gives you $200 per month. On average, your customers stick around for 50 months, and your gross profit is 50%. Your LTV is $5,000. Make sense? Simple math. You just figure out like average revenue times they stick around times your gross profit. And on the CAC front, let's say you've got a sales team and a marketing team. You look at, okay, what is the total expense on average in any given month, and how many customers do we acquire in any given month? So say in our case, or in an example, it's $10,000, and we acquire 10 customers on average per month. That CAC is 1,000. So if you look at your LTV as 5,000 and your CAC is 1,000, what's the ratio? 5:1. That actually is a very nice, impressive CAC. Cool. So that's how you calculate your LTV and your CAC and come up with that ratio. But let's just make sure we're all on the same page. If you're planning on going international, you better have this dynamic where your LTV is greater than your CAC. It's logical, right? You don't want to go international if your CAC is actually higher than your LTV. That's a different problem that you should solve before you decide to go outside your local geography. You need LTV to be higher than your CAC. So what does LTV get impacted by? How do you influence LTV? The thing about LTV is there are standard things that impact LTV. For example, you're discounting. If you discount more, most likely you're getting less per customer, your LTV goes down. Your churn rates, your cross-sell, your upsell. But one thing that was really interesting for HubSpot as we continue to expand globally is there's something called country maturity. What we saw is when we go into a given country, our LTV actually quite dramatically shifted between emerging countries and developed countries. So sort of like when you make a decision, you got to be thoughtful. Is a country that I'm going into an emerging economy or a developed economy? Now, just because LTV is low for an emerging country, it's not a bad thing, but you want to keep that in mind is that your LTV for an emerging market will not be as high as the LTV for a developed country. It's kind of like this curve whereby your developed countries will most likely have your highest LTV. What about CAC? If you're doing inbound marketing, you have leverage. You should be acquiring customers not in a one-to-one fashion, but into a one-to-many fashion. Now, when you think about CAC and your sales engine, what we've seen at HubSpot is that CAC and the sales engine goes from inexpensive to very expensive. For example, if you have an inexpensive sales engine like freemium or e-commerce, it's the least expensive. You could go a little bit more expensive with partner-centric. Inside sales gets a little bit more expensive, and the most expensive for your sales team when you go to a country is field sales. Now, that CAC is going to go from inexpensive to very high if you go to a field sales model. Now, I'm not saying you should just pick one over the other, but I would almost look at it like this Venn diagram, which is when you're about to go into a country, you want to strive for a sales engine which is the least or the lowest in CAC. And once you get that nailed, you're starting to get some revenue, getting some customers. You can go to the next sales engine, which is a little bit more expensive. So keep that in mind, is strive for a sales engine that is the least expensive and then work your way up. So if I put this in a simple example, let's say DACH, which I told you guys is Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. Because it is a developed region, our LTV on a sort of like low, medium, high scale is most likely on a high scale. And my sales VP says we're going to eventually have an inside sales team. I'm actually okay with it because while an inside sales engine has a high CAC, it's okay because I know my LTV is also high. Because my LTV is high, yep, my CAC is here, it's still a good engine to go to market with. But my VP of sales comes to me and says, hey, India's LTV, when I look at my data, for example, is medium when I look at a low, medium, and high scale. And my VP of sales tells me, I'm going to go to India and I'm going to hire a bunch of field sales reps who are going to drive around in fancy cars, and they want a dinner allowance every day. I'm like, wow, man, that CAC is going to be expensive. The LTV is medium. I don't think that's a smart move. Does that make sense? Sort of like you got to like think about your sales engine, the cost of that sales engine, and compare it to LTV. So to wrap up over here, you got to do inbound. You got to use inbound as a way to give you leverage. You don't want to try and attract customers or prospects or leads in a one-to-one relationship. You got to implement an inbound strategy, and like Shah had shared, you got to get that flywheel cranking. As you get inbound going, what you want to do is look at your countries and be thoughtful. You don't want to just dive in because it's a cool country. Hey, let's go to Paris because Paris is a beautiful city. Yep, absolutely. But is it going to be a good investment for us? So we ourselves internally at HubSpot look at a bunch of data points. We size each country, understand the complexities of going into a country before we make a decision. And then when you decide to go into a country, you don't always have to go traditional, go hire field salespeople. You can think about sales engines that have low CAC and work your way up as you get revenue going for your business in that given country. So bottom line, go faster. International is actually really cool. If you're thoughtful and strategic on how you approach your expansion, it pays back tremendously. It creates incredible amount of leverage and growth for your business. So keep that in mind. Now, I know I started with a slide that talked about sharks. It is a big, bad world with lots of sharks out there. But if you're careful and you do it correctly, you could be hanging out at a beach and having fun. All right? Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. That was something I'd seen versions of internally, and I think G2 put a really nice polish on it, and that was awesome to see. What we're going to do now, in your agenda, we did have a short break now to make sure things are running in parallel with the other track. We're going to make that extremely short, so we're going to just have about 2 minutes, and then we're going to bring on the next panel, and I think the next panel is going to be really exciting. G2 covered how HubSpot has grown internationally and jumped into a few different regions and how we think about it. The next panel is going to be all about growth in Southeast Asia and India with some companies that are doing some really, really interesting stuff. Andrew, one of the panelists at Kojak I was chatting to the other week, and he was telling me about their growth story, and it honestly blew me away. So I think you'll find a ton of value from it, and it'll be really, really interesting. So we're going to get that started in around 2 minutes. So if you want to head over to the revenue track, now's your time to do that. If you want to stay here, I'd probably just stay seated and we'll get started very shortly. Thanks. Everybody, we're just going to get started right now. So our panel's going to kick off, and like I said earlier, I think this is going to be really interesting for anybody that's wanting to learn about growth in this part of the world, and we've got some great examples from companies that are doing this in some really interesting ways. So let's welcome up Joe, our moderator for today, and he's going to introduce. Welcome.
Come on up, fellas. Check, check. Hello? All right.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, guys. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Quick show of hands. How many of you guys are currently doing any kind of business in, say, Southeast Asia or India? Okay, roughly about more than half the room. That's good. Perfect, because today we're talking about growth stories in both of those markets. So without further ado, let's get started. Gentlemen, maybe you can share a little bit more about yourself and kind of what you're currently working on.
Sure. So my name is Tyler Norwood. I am a partner at Antler, which is a global startup generator HQ'd here out of Singapore. And what we're working on is building a platform across the world to help empower more people to take the entrepreneurial journey and to start their companies, and providing them a network of global support to help them be more successful.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Vin. I'm the founder and CEO of MoneySmart. MoneySmart's Singapore and Indonesia's largest personal finance portal. We currently operate in 3 markets, Singapore, Indonesia, and Hong Kong, and we'll be entering 2 more markets by the end of the year.
Hi, I'm Andrew Murphy. I work at Gojek, and I help to do all the initial launches for Gojek across the region, and I'm currently running all enterprise relations, whether it's like with brands or multi-product conglomerate partnerships.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So maybe you could share a bit more about your guys' current growth and how you went about achieving it.
I can start because we have the smallest, we're the youngest. So Antler launched at the beginning of this year. We had our initial co-founding team of 4 people sitting in an office at the beginning of this year thinking about how we were going to build this global platform. Since then, in the course of this year, we had our first class of founders come through our cohort in Singapore. We had 62 founders from 21 different countries come through our platform, and we ended up investing into 11 teams who are now helping raise their seed round. How we accomplish that growth is just hard work. I think there's no tactic besides just waking up every day and focusing on the core things that your business is trying to accomplish and just knocking them down every day.
So MoneySmart's been around for 9 years now, and we've grown quite significantly, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. A lot of that growth is really in investing in, solid fundamentals that don't necessarily have short-term payoffs, but have medium to long-term payoffs. One of the big things we invested in really early on in 2011 was content marketing, and back then, there was nobody, I think, in this part of the world really focusing on that. And it's tough, right? It's a tough decision. We were a bootstrap startup at the time, and to have one of the 4 headcount that you can afford be in content that has no immediate returns was an incredibly big bet, which paid off, a year and a half to 2 years later. And so that's how we really used content to help grow the business over the past couple of years.
So Gojek, even though it's been around for over 7 years, we've only had an app since 2015. Prior to that, it was a call center, and it was mainly almost like with a social impact focus. I think what's helped us the most with our growth is I'd like boil it down to creativity. One, in that, I think a lot of people will try to tell you to focus, which is probably true, but we've tried to be a platform from day one and then built in different ways where we can monetize and cross-sell. And then that same creativity also applies to our branding and the way that we've looked at our brand, and a lot of the creative little ways of ads that we've done, where it will be really small language on a billboard, and by the time you read to the bottom, it's if you've read to the bottom of this, you should probably be on a Gojek. And so it's those creative things that help endear people to your brand. So like another thing that we're doing that's really interesting is we're looking at food as content. So people in Indonesians identify with the food than they identify with Gojek. And so for that reason, we've now started something called Go Food Festival, where we've bought 28 parking lots across Indonesia, and we're setting up these modular food courts where if there's a big fad in food, we can actually take one of those young entrepreneurs and help bring them on tour across Indonesia. And I think there's lots of different creative ways where you can get people to embrace your brand and identify with it.
Perfect. So just to recap, what's led to your growth is working hard, content marketing, and creativity.
So I just want to just jump in, and I really like the point that Andrew made. You know, I think that there's always talk about tactics, like marketing tactics and the basics of marketing and all of this stuff, and I think a lot of people walk away like understanding the tactics. But the reality is, like, if you look at a company like Gojek, and I'm sure you guys have done this too, and we do it all the time, is like you have to think of novel ways to grow. You have to be opportunistic. You have to constantly think of things that other people aren't doing. And I think that's the part that a lot of founders miss, like at tech events like this, and from all the sort of platitudes that people talk on, is like there's no way to formulaically talk. You can't make a slide which says like creativity, this is how you do it, here's the formula. Yeah. It's like waking up every day and being like, what crazy stuff could we do today that could possibly like create value for our customers or capture value in the supply chain? And those things like add up incrementally, I mean, really fast.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not as simple as like when they make you do that. I forget what that chart's called, but it's like, what's your unique value proposition? When you just look at it like that and you're writing all these things on a piece of paper, it doesn't really embody the whole thing. It's more of like, I don't know, outside the box sort of thinking. Yeah. Of like, what aren't other people doing, or like what can really drive this home, or what's really funny. Yeah, exactly. And especially like with the consumers, especially in Southeast Asia and India, like the middle class is growing. Levels of education are rising. The amount of expendable income is rising. So that attracts a lot of companies advertising and trying to get to these customers. So the level of attention that people will pay to just boring, bland marketing or boring, bland value propositions, like you said, is very low. Or even like one thing that we did that probably confused a lot of people was not using the Gojek brand in Vietnam and Thailand. So being Go Viet, having the flag on the arm, and partnering with local founders. So people thought like, oh, you're giving away too much equity, but actually it makes sense to empower those local founders and have it be a locally founded business and have everybody there feel empowered as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the drivers love it. Yeah.
So in terms of creativity, would you say it also has to be tied to a business objective as well, or just push the boundaries and that'll lead to business growth?
I mean, I think growth is the objective. I mean, in the venture capital startup game, like I think, at least for me, the definition of a startup is a company which is designed to grow. It's not necessarily a new company. Like if I open a restaurant tomorrow, say you and I open a restaurant, it's like a hot dog stand. It's a new company, but would you consider it a startup? No, because the prospects of that growing very fast are very low. So I think like if you're starting a startup, the implied objective is that it's going to grow very fast. It's going to create new value in a market, and it's going to capture value in that market. And so I think the creativity is just figuring out ways to grow, creating new channels of growth, creating novel ways to promote your existing channels to grow in different ways, and you know, things like putting the Vietnam flag on drivers' arms. Like you just try a bunch of things, and what sticks.
That makes perfect sense. Now, I think a lot of the marketers in this room may be responsible for regional marketing as well. So when it comes to planning, the big debate is whether they should create regional, say, marketing or growth plans, or they should make it very, let's say, local market specific. Which one do you guys recommend and why?
So I think in our experience, you know, when we look across the different markets that we operate in, one thing that we realize is that, you know, more or less the digital channels that you have at your disposal are the same across the board, right? So you've got search, you've got social, you've got you know, syndication and distribution, especially when it comes to content. There are different degrees in which different markets take up to each of these channels, right? So for example, Singapore is a very search and social driven market. Indonesia is a lot more social driven and much less search driven. Hong Kong's sort of similar to Singapore, right? So you then have to double down on your resources where it fits the market. So we've got, what we call a 70% playbook that applies across all markets as best practice, but then the 30% needs to be localized, right? Because content that works in Singapore is very different from content that works in Indonesia. You have to understand what are the challenges that consumers face on the ground and create content that's of value to that market. So the approach is the same, but the outcomes can be quite different in different markets.
Do you want to go? Should I go?
Yeah, I think to Vince's point, like the tactics and the channels are the same. Like it's basic marketing 101. The different countries don't have different channels. They're all there in different forms. And I mean, you run your basic performance marketing strategy and different countries are going to optimize on different things. And what I think is important in terms of this sort of centralized versus decentralized planning is like every team should run a very similar performance marketing playbook that helps them find the best channels for growth in their specific market. And what I've seen work best in, when we were building Zalora, when I was building Jabong in India, is you have to let the local markets have 25 to 30% leeway to just make mistakes, like to try new things that maybe will only work in their market. And if you don't do that, like you really hold back a lot of the intelligence that your local staff has, and you restrict yourself to doing things that are going to work in one market and not work in another. So like overlaying that on top of a centralized, just general like high quality performance marketing team, I think really adds the next level of like letting that team figure out what are the creative things to do in Indonesia versus what are the creative things to do in Vietnam. You have a massive difference in cultures and holidays and timings, and there's all these things that you can do in one market that won't work in another market, and you need to give your local teams the leeway to try that stuff. Even if it doesn't work, it's still worth trying.
Yeah, I'd say there's like certain underlying things that are just human. So like, for example, with our brand, like we always want to support the drivers and support entrepreneurs and feature those stories, but then there's a certain amount of like, all right, well, how much do people value the security of a corporation or being able to be reactive? So to have that bandwidth where, like for example, for us, Ovaltine and Milo just pulled us into this battle between the two of them. So Milo keeps pushing that, like, we are the champions, we are the best, like, have the best. So then Ovaltine put up this billboard across the street, it's like, just do what you love. And they're trying to do this campaign about, like, allow children to do what they love instead of pushing them too much on tests. And so now they've done these cartoons where there's, like, one which is a Grab guy, and it says, like, join us, we are the champions, we have the best product. And then the other one is a Goviet person drinking Ovaltine saying, oh, we just do what we love. And I think, like, being able to act on the back of that is really interesting. Yeah.
Those are awesome examples and great advice, I think, for everyone here. Now, obviously, this is a very diverse market, different challenges in each market. So which market in particular have you found particularly challenging to grow in? And what are you doing to tackle this challenge?
For us, every market has a different set of challenges, right? The thing about Southeast Asia is that, it's not a homogeneous market. In all the different countries in the region, you've got different languages at play, different levels of channel adoption. And so that customer acquisition tends to be a big challenge. The other bit is also about monetization, particularly in our business, right? So in markets like Indonesia, there's a lot of education required, not just on the consumer side, but also on the B2B side, right? So as a marketplace, we have to educate businesses on how basic digital marketing works. And if they don't understand it, then they don't see the value of our platform. So we found Indonesia to be the toughest market to sort of marry the two. But we've kind of cracked that now, and so business is growing quite nicely in Indonesia. But we found that to be the biggest challenge so far.
I'm sure Andrew could probably give some pretty good advice on cracking the Indonesian market.
I'd say for us, it's Bangkok, mainly because there's such a strong culture there already for transportation. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the wind drivers, which are the drivers in every corner. So they have a right to only drive within a certain area. And if they were to take a ride and they would go to another area, they have the threat of being beaten up or something like that. And so it's figuring out how to work within that society and then over time work with the guys who own the rights to those various neighborhoods. So for that reason, you have to be a little bit more adaptive. So it's like, well, we look at supply and what else can we focus on and how can we work our way around this and be still in there to have the option later to continue to play in Thailand.
All right. Now, besides your guys' current company, which other companies in this region are you most excited about and why, from a growth perspective?
Well, obviously, there are two companies.
Besides these two companies.
There's not one specific company, and I think I don't want to stand on stage and name one specific company. But one thing that I'm very excited about for Southeast Asia in general is the maturity of the market. And there's a lot of things coming together. So the non-startup world in Southeast Asia is developing very rapidly. Specifically, manufacturing is progressing to sort of the next level of finished goods, not just so focused on commodity manufacturing, as well as the governments in Southeast Asia are doing a really great job of promoting entrepreneurship, promoting education, and promoting, like, I think everyone's heard this word like deep tech. There's been this big deep tech push, which I think is sort of a platitude, but it's also very exciting. You know, if you take Singapore as an example, you have SMART, you have A-Star, you have Enterprise SG, which is just reorganized to be more useful for the startup ecosystem. You have SG Innovate, and that combined with, you know, the quality of students that are coming out of the universities here and the universities regionally, all coming together. Like, I'm very excited for the future and seeing like the next level of sophistication in startups here, specifically in deep tech, right? So Razer has led the push, being sort of the first hardware unicorn, at least consumer hardware unicorn coming out of Southeast Asia, and I'm very excited to see that sector continue to grow and progress and add a tremendous amount of value for the region here.
I think for me, it's two B2B businesses, PetSnap and Funding Societies, which I think are super interesting. So PetSnap is a patent search engine. It's a B2B business, so most of us would not have heard about it, but you know, the company is basically created a new category for themselves, and they've just grown phenomenally. Funding Societies as well is a sort of invoice financing company, and I think it's filling a real need in markets like Indonesia, especially where, you know, businesses and entrepreneurs really have a lot of trouble in financing their businesses, even though they're doing pretty well. So I've seen some of these businesses take off in a really fast way, so I'm quite excited about that.
They should get a loan from Gojek. The businesses that I'm interested in, I think I'm the most interested in consumer. Consumer from Vietnam, because of the fastest growing per capita GDP in Ho Chi Minh. I think there's a lot of potential for young brands, and it's still relatively cheap to build brands. And in Indonesia, because there's such a large population. What I think would also be really interesting is if people start taking a franchise model and figuring out how to do partnerships in other markets. So if you're not interested in setting up a regional headquarters here and expanding to Indonesia, you partner with somebody in Vietnam that has great technology and say, you know, I'll give you 20% of Indonesia, you work with a local family and you exit in 3 years. And that way you reduce your risk of operations.
Okay, wonderful. Now, obviously you guys have worked in different industries, you've seen different companies grow. What's been the biggest factor that you've seen in companies that grow versus those that just don't?
I think the first year. The first 2 years, if everybody can get along and keep working together, it's more of a social issue. It's like if you can just get off the ground and not have any social problems and you have like a pretty decent concept that can get funded, you'll probably keep making it. But I think the biggest issue is somehow there's some sort of divisive relationship between the founders, or there aren't enough founders. So like companies that have 3 or 4 founders usually are more likely to succeed because they can support each other, and they can also prevent each other from being too much of a tyrant with the rest of the company.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think a lot of people focus on, you know, the businesses like that, but I think the human element, like the team facets, can also lead to, you said, success or lack thereof. So it's a good point.
I think similar to Andrew, to me it's all about people and culture. So, you know, when I started the business, I was a sole founder, and it's really in the last 2 to 3 years that we've really built out a strong management team. making sure that you hire the very best people who are literally smarter than you in almost every way possible is the most liberating thing that you can do as a founder, right? Because you don't have to sweat the details. You have complete faith and trust that the different functional heads will be able to do their job and make the right call. Then the role of the founder or CEO then is to integrate all the different functional heads to ensure that they're working cohesively together to set a very clear direction and keep repeating that to ensure that the entire organization is aligned, right? Which goes back to his point about not being divisive in that sense.
I think for me, it actually has nothing to do with growth specifically. It's the product. So the sort of startup zeitgeist has adopted this lean methodology, and this, everyone knows building an MVP, and you have Mark Zuckerberg like grow so fast you break things, and I think that has been overdone, and it's been adopted too strongly by the startup community to the point where I see a lot of people now who sort of build an MVP as soon as they have any indication of customers coming on board, they just start focusing on growing it as fast as possible. And there's two things that I see. If the founder understands these things, I believe they'll grow very quickly. If they don't, I'm very skeptical. The first one is their unit economics, right? Your company is not going to grow fast, sustainably for a very long time if you don't understand your unit economics, right? Because you may very well be giving away free crack, is what we call it. Like, if you give crack away for free, you'll have a lot of customers, but it's not a sustainable business. So it's a red herring, like it's false growth. And it's a really bad sign if the founders don't understand their unit economics and can't explain, like, maybe the reason why you're growing so fast is because you're giving a free product away, basically. And like, why would people not take that? The second is understanding why people really love what it is that you're doing, right? And it goes into the same thing. Understanding your unit economics is the quantitative side of it. The qualitative side is really understanding, I think, the best example I have is Soylent. Like, the founder of Soylent basically started it on Reddit as a project. Like, he was building a different company and made this like meal mix because he was tired of spending so much time and money on food. And he built like a cult following of people who loved the product. And I see a lot of people who will come in and they'll say, yeah, we have all this amazing growth. Look at how many new customers we have coming on board, et cetera. And then it's like, look at the retention rates, and it's like a dive into the ground. And they can't explain in a very simple, casual interview, like, why do people really like what it is that you're doing? What is your value proposition, and like, how does that resonate with users? And that, to me, like, if you haven't figured that out yet, don't worry about growth. You're not at the growth stage yet. And we definitely learned this with building Zalora. Like, I think Zalora expanded too fast. And if we would have taken a little bit more time understanding our product and understanding the actual value proposition that we're bringing to our customers, your growth is faster and better over the long term because it's more sustainable. Like, you're built on a solid foundation of good product.
I mean, I think this is some very practical points, and this is the first time on the panel I've talked about crack, so this is a very interesting one.
There's like 3 Americans on stage, and
I was going to say, we had to talk about crack at one point during the talk. Sorry, guys. So you guys talked about hiring and the team elements to lead the success, but when you guys are growing your team, besides hiring people that are smarter than you, what kind of criteria do you look for when hiring your team members?
The process that I went through is firstly being very clear and understanding what outcome you're trying to achieve, right? So what is the end result that you're looking to achieve, or that this person that you're trying to bring on board and hire should achieve. Secondly, throughout the interview process, I'm looking to get an education. So if I'm not the subject matter expert, if I feel like I know more than the person talking to me, then that's usually not a good sign. The very best people that we brought into the company have given me a crash course in, whether it's marketing or commercial strategy through the interview process, right? So a well-designed interview process that is very tailored to what you're looking out for and allows the interviewer to get an education usually is you know, the yardstick that I use to find the very best talent.
I'd say like table stakes is being either qualified for the job and or like intellectually up to the challenge. But then after that, like once you get down to your short list of 5 people or whatever, the thing that I care the most about is level-headedness. So if this person is put in a situation of stress, how reactive are they to new information? How likely are they to create a culture of stress within the company, especially for leaders? After that, it's authenticity. So authenticity and trust, like how well do they know themselves? Are they insecure? Like basically it's like how easily can this person be shook? And then the bottom level, I guess, is it's sort of like the intellect, I guess, of like how far deep can they go? How flexible are they in their thinking? What's their agility to learn more new things?
Okay, very interesting.
For me, I'm very purpose-driven, so I always actually lead interviews with like, why do you want to join Antler? And I'm very biased to that first answer as to like what's their purpose, right? Because I personally don't like working with people who are there. And you guys mentioned like authenticity and whatever. Like, I don't want to spend any of my life working with people who like aren't there for the same purpose, like the mission of the company. No matter how good they are tactically or whatever, like it's just not enjoyable. And I think over the long term, what you do every day in your job, even if you're really good at that, like as that changes and adapts and you go through hard times and good times, like being there for the same purpose is really important. So I always lead with that question, and then I think it's something that I can improve to be less judgmental of how people answer that, but like I make a really hard opinion about somebody based on why they want to join the company.
No, I think those are all very interesting points, because I think a lot of time when employers are hiring, they look at education, they look at, you know, relevant experience, but I think that you guys have kind of covered things that not many employers cover, so I think it's very interesting for everyone here. I'm going to wrap it up because I don't want to eat into your guys' lunchtime. The last question is, what's been your biggest learning since growing your brand in this region? Biggest learning, guys?
I can start. I think the biggest learning is being humble. So the best way to be successful in this region, and Vince said it, is like to never be the smartest person in the room. I think Southeast Asia forces that upon you a lot stronger than other regions because everything is so close and it's so different, right? So like if you are a successful entrepreneur in Singapore, you fly an hour and a half to Vietnam and you're an absolute newbie. You don't know anything. Like your experience applies very little to that region. So I think, and arrogant people don't last very long in Southeast Asia, I don't think. I mean,
let's hope not.
There's obviously anecdotal cases against that, but yeah, for me, it's just realizing that like everyone has something to bring to the table, and the best way to create value here and to be a leader for me has been to always just be surrounded by people who are better than you at what you're doing, and be the, you know, Vinod said it, like your job is to bring all those people together and align them to a specific mission.
Okay.
I think a different point, one of the biggest learnings that I've had over the last few years is the importance of research and customer feedback in understanding what your value proposition is to the market, right? And because Southeast Asia is so different, right? Each market's so different. What you think you bring of value, or what you bring of value to customers in Singapore is very different from, you know, what resonates with customers in Indonesia and Vietnam and so on. So doing the research, understanding where the gaps are in the market, and you know, how the company's mission can be fulfilled in you know, in a consistent way, but possibly in a localized way in each of these markets is quite key. And you only do that by talking to your customers. And the naive belief that, you know, we'll just replicate what we have or run Southeast Asia out of a hub like Singapore or Malaysia doesn't work at all. So that's been my biggest learning.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of the same thing. Like after humility, it's sort of creativity. But beyond just like these sort of practices, I think you can also take that approach to your, and this is not related to Gojek, but to your capital structure, your corporate structure in a country. Be open to partnering to be able to catalyze growth and take different approaches, whether it's your brand or anything. and never be so arrogant where if you hit a wall or you keep trying the same thing over and over again.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Hey, so I think that was a fantastic panel. I know this was actually one of the things I was looking forward to hearing the most from today, so I'm glad it lived up to expectations. We're going to take a very short 2-minute break, and then we're going to be back with Arvinder, the Managing Director for Twitter in APAC, talking about how to reach your most influential audience. So we'll be back here in 2 minutes for that.